Good morning, business people. Listen, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to be brief. As Henry VIII said to each of his wives, I won't keep you long. My main topic this morning is going to be leadership lessons from Pope Francis. We'll come to that in a minute, but first I want to take the opportunity as quickly as I can just to tell you why I am so humbled and delighted and honored to be with you here this morning. First, let's begin with the Sisters of St. Joseph. Sister Eileen, where are you? Sister Eileen, I got to tell you, I almost teared up this morning listening to you talk about the early experiences of the sisters coming here, because it is so absolutely representative of the unimaginable sacrifices that women religious have made around this country and around the world. And I want you to know how profoundly grateful, not just the people of Orange County, but all of us are for what you do. You can sit down. I'm done. And just for you, as a special treat for the sisters with us here this morning, I'm going to tell you my favorite nun's story. Now, some of you in this room may be aware that a few years ago, the Vatican launched a couple, two separate sort of investigations or checkups on American nuns in the States. And although these things were officially billed as supportive, there's no doubt that at the grassroots, among many women in religious life, they were perceived as punitive or possibly as crackdowns, and then there was a good deal of hurt. It also produced a massive groundswell of reaction and criticism at the Catholic grassroots because so many of us carry around in our hearts this enormous reservoir of love for the nuns. So these things were quite controversial. At one stage along the way, the LCWR, which is the main leadership organization for nuns in the States, decided they wanted to do a documentary about the contributions that sisters in America have made over the decades. And they wanted to get A-list talent to sort of voice it, so they got Cokie Roberts and so on. But apparently, somewhere along the way, their budget ran out, and they were forced to fall back on the likes of me. And so I was interviewed at the very end of this process. It had been underway for about 6 months, and we did the interview in Dallas because, Bishop, I was speaking at the Ministry Congress in Dallas, Fort Worth. Now, the woman they had hired to do this documentary, I think she came from the Disney Channel, a very expert person and a lifelong Catholic, knew the Catholic Church very well. But her sound guy and her camera guy were these 20-something young guys, totally secular, and knew absolutely nothing about the Catholic Church going in. Okay? So at one stage during this interview, we took a smoke break, and I'm standing outside chatting with these two guys. And I said to one of them, I think it was the camera guy, I said, hey, listen, just out of curiosity, since, you started at zero about the Catholic Church, tell me what you've learned about the Catholic Church as a result of doing this project. And the guy looks at me and he says, look, man, the truth of it is, I still don't get anything about this whole Catholic thing. To me, it's just way too complicated. But I can tell you the one thing I have learned with total certainty. Oh, really? This will be interesting. What is it? It says, here's what I have learned. Don't mess with the nuns. I said to him, young man, you have stumbled across an infallible truth about Catholic life, and never forget it. So sisters, I want you to know this. The next time somebody is in your face, please know the rest of us have your backs. Okay. All right. Secondly, Bishop Van. It has been my privilege over the years to get to know you, not just as a newsmaker, but also, I hope I'm not overstating things, as a friend. There are so many things I'd like to thank you for. For one thing, all those years that I've been speaking at Dallas Fort Worth when you were there, you didn't blackball me as a speaker, so my wife thanks you, our mortgage company thanks you. But most fundamentally, I want to thank you not just for all the things that you do, but for being such an exceptionally fine pastor and an exceptionally fine human being. Highest praise I can give you, Bishop, if the circumstances were ever to present themselves, I would be honored to have you as my confessor. Now, believe me, there are not enough hours in your day for that to be realistic. okay? But it's the highest tribute that I can give any priest. You have such a fine priestly heart and priestly soul. It's a tribute I want to bestow on you. Third, I think Carolyn Wu has left the building, if I'm not mistaken, but I just want to say this. I have known Carolyn when she was at Notre Dame and now at CRS. She represents the faith in places high and low. I mean, how many different people could tell you that in the same span of time, they were hanging out with the president of the World Bank and then rubbing shoulders with an impoverished coffee farmer in Nicaragua? You know, I've seen her in all those different environments, and she represents the faith with such integrity and such intelligence. I don't know about you, but every time I'm in the same room with her, I feel better about being Catholic. So thank you, Carolyn, for who you are and what you do. Finally, to our award winners here today, and I know I'm not quite sure where Mr. Musco has gotten off to, but if he were in the room, I would say to him that one of my peak emotional experiences over the years covering the Vatican and covering the Church came on Palm Sunday in 2005 when I was in St. Peter's Square. Of course, that was the end period for John Paul II. We all knew that the Pope was coming close to the end. It was his last public appearance that day. He appeared at the window of his apartment overlooking St. Peter's Square. Of course, the crowd was oceanic because there are people there who wanted to accompany the Holy Father in his final moments. And they rolled him to the window in his wheelchair. And for 12 minutes and 47 seconds, he sat there and could not produce a single word. He tried and tried and tried. But of course, by that stage, the Parkinson's and the respiratory difficulties had taken over, and he simply could not speak. And yet, and bear in mind, this was a man who had spoken millions of words all over the planet during the course of a papacy that spanned almost 27 years, and yet, I can guarantee you, that was the single most eloquent moment of his papacy, because what that said about his determination to be present and his love for the people who had gathered to see him, no words could possibly have expressed. And I had the same sensation watching Mr. Musco at this lectern here today. It will go down for me as another peak emotional moment, because what that said about what is in that man's heart and soul, and your heart and soul too, Mr. Heim, is something that words could not possibly convey. So to both of you, thank you not primarily for what you do, as precious and irreplaceable as it is. On behalf of all of us, thank you for who you are. By the way, I know all of you are in leadership positions, so I really want to recommend, you have to do a lot of public speaking. I really want to recommend this to you as a rhetorical device. Always start by flattering your audience. Okay, you do that, you can usually get away with murder. And let's test that theory, shall we, by diving into the heart of things today. What I want to do, very briefly, is try to list for you 3 leadership lessons that we can draw from watching Pope Francis in action. And if we have time, I'll throw in a bonus item at the end, which is actually drawn not from Francis, but another Pope, Pope Benedict. Let's begin with a premise. That premise is Francis has now been Pope for more than 2 years. He was elected on March 13th, 2013. And by the normal, ordinary, observable, measurable standards of effective leadership, I think we would have to say he's not doing too bad. Okay, substantively, we could talk about a whole series of reforms that he's introduced, including a sweeping financial overhaul of the Vatican intended to make it a role model of transparency and accountability. As his engineer of that reform, Australian Cardinal George Pell, put it, the aim is to turn the Vatican from an example of what not to do when it comes to money management, which has been its role for many a year, into a role model of best practices. And we could go on and on cataloging substantive ways in which the Pope has moved the ball, but I think probably the real test of how effective a leader he has been is the way that, if I can use the corporate word, he has succeeded in completely rebranding public perceptions of the Catholic Church. Think about what the narrative of the Church and the Vatican in particular was prior to March 13th, 2013. It was perceived as an institution in decline, gripped by scandal, and mired by crisis. Today, while those things have not gone away, the public narrative about the Vatican and the papacy is rock star Pope takes the world by storm. Okay, now we could illustrate that in a variety of different ways. For example, we could mention, and I don't know if you all know this, are you aware that the Pope just crossed the 19 million mark in terms of his following on Twitter? Now, that makes him by far the most followed religious and spiritual figure in the Twitter universe, though not yet the most followed human being. Do you all know who the single most followed person on Twitter is as of today? Katy Perry, ladies and gentlemen. Rounding out the top 5, Katy Perry, Justin Bieber, Barack Obama, Taylor Swift, and Lady Gaga. And yes, folks, surely the apocalypse cannot be far behind. But, you know, give the poor Pope a break. He's only been on Twitter 2 years. That's not too bad. Or we could talk about his poll numbers. It is a fact, not a hunch, not a theory, not an anecdotal impression. It is a hardcore empirical fact that in every corner of the world in which public opinion can be scientifically measured, this Pope has numbers that politicians and celebrities would sacrifice their children to pagan gods to obtain. Okay. The most recent Wall Street Journal, Washington Post survey in the United States, for instance, found that overall, Pope Francis has a 78% approval rating in the United States among the general public, and among American Catholics, he's got a 90% approval rate. Now, sit with that number for a minute, 90%, and think about what we all know about how badly divided the Catholic Church in this country is over almost everything. Okay, the truth of it is, under ordinary circumstances, it would be tough to get 90% of American Catholics to agree that today is Friday. Okay? On the left, you would have some crowds suspecting a hierarchical plot to control our sense of time, and on the right, you would have some tratty outfit arguing that we should still be following the Julian calendar. Okay? So under those circumstances, that result is nothing short of staggering. Or we could talk about all the magazine covers the Pope has been on. You know, Times Person of the Year. I mean, for God's sakes, folks, he was on the cover of the Rolling Stone. And yes, for those of you old enough to get the reference, I did buy 5 copies for my mother. Okay? In other words, this Pope has become a kind of pop culture phenomenon. And while it is fun to celebrate all the ways in which he's become a celebrity, the deeper significance of it all is he has created a new missionary moment for Catholicism, an opportunity to reintroduce the faith to a world. Some portions of it had tuned us out a long time ago and had become inclined on those rare moments when they did look to see what was going on in the church, to view it all through a human hermeneutic of suspicion and hostility. Today, there is a kind of lens of sympathetic new interest. It is probably the most powerful missionary calling card we're going to see in our lifetimes. And that's the real payoff, the cash value, if you like, of the Francis moment. So what is it about this man that allows him to lead effectively? I'd very briefly like to tick off 3 basic points. And look, none of this is going to be a news flash to any of you in this room. The point is not that these are novel ideas. It's rather that we can see their validity from what Pope Francis does. So those 3 leadership tips are: 1, lead by example. Lead by example. 2, make sure you're getting good advice. And 3, don't be afraid to ignore that advice when there's something important at stake. Okay? Let's begin with leading by example. You all know from your own experience how important this is. If you want to foster customer service in your company, then by God, your workforce needs to see you serving customers. If you want to make a real point about workplace productivity, then by God, your team needs to see you being productive. Pope Francis is someone who exudes that aspect of leading by example. In the early days after his election, by that I mean the first 24, 48, 72 hours after his election, it was, of course, those gestures of personal simplicity and humility that sort of charmed the world. Now, you all remember, right? The fact that after the election was over and the cardinals were leaving the apostolic palace, rather than getting into the chauffeur-driven Mercedes limousine, Pope Francis hopped onto the shuttle bus with the other cardinals like one of the fellas, right? The fact that when he appeared on the balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square, before he imposed his blessing on the city and the world, he paused in silent prayer and asked those people to pray for him. The fact that famously he chose not to live in the sumptuous papal apartments, but instead to remain in room 201 in the Santa Marta, that's the hotel on Vatican grounds where the cardinals had stayed during the election. The fact that the day after his election, he went back to the Casa del Clero, a residence in Rome where he had been staying before the conclave, to pack his own bag and pay his own bill. Or hell, I mean, the fact that the morning after his election, he picked up the phone to call his newspaper delivery guy in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to say, hey, I'm not going to be coming back. Can you please cancel my subscription? And by the way, if I'm Archbishop Mario Poli, the new guy in Buenos Aires, I'm a little ticked off by that because now I have to go through the rigmarole of restarting the paper. But symbolically, it was brilliant. Now, all of that arose naturally and organically from the personality of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the man who is Pope Francis. It's simply who he is. However, if you want a 5-star banner headline insight into Pope Francis, something never to be forgotten, here it is, ladies and gentlemen, in full living color. Beneath that humble, simple exterior lies the mind of a brilliant Jesuit politician. Okay, this is a pope with a plan. Okay, he's been in leadership his entire adult life. He was elected the superior of the Jesuit order in Argentina at the tender age of 35. He has been exercising responsibility ever since. And so the plan beneath those gestures was that Pope Francis is trying to achieve a Copernican revolution in perceptions of leadership in the Catholic Church. What he wants is that when people see the symbols of authority in Catholicism, when they see the Roman collars that priests wear, when they see the pectoral crosses that bishops wear, he wants them to think automatically not in terms of power and privilege, but rather in terms of service. And further, what he understands is that if that is actually to percolate throughout the church, if he's going to change the culture of leadership in Catholicism, then he has to do it by his own example. You know, I am often asked in these venues whether all this humble and simplicity stuff about Pope Francis, whether it's real or whether it's calculated. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a both-and tradition in Catholicism. Okay? St. Thomas Aquinas famously said that grace perfects nature, it doesn't cancel it out. So the proper answer to the question of whether these gestures of humble humility and simplicity by the pontiff, whether they are real or whether they're calculated, the right answer is both. Okay, they are real. They genuinely express who the man is, but they're also calculated in the sense that they express in themselves an entire leadership program for the church. Okay? So that's insight one, lead by example and make sure you back it up. All right, 2, make sure you're getting good advice. Make sure you're getting good advice. Folks, I don't know how much contact you've had with the Jesuit order over the years, but if you know the Jesuits from the inside, then you know something about the role that a superior in the Jesuits played. Basically, the job description for a Jesuit superior is to consult widely, to listen to everyone, but at the end of the day, make the decisions yourself. Okay? And that is very much the model that Pope Francis has brought into the papacy. This is a pope who knows how to make sure that he does not become encased in a bubble, but that he still has the ear of people at all levels of the church. I'll give you 2 examples of how he's done that. One of the first things he did after his election was he created a council of cardinal advisors, a new body in the Vatican made up of 8, and now it's 9, cardinals from various parts of the world, only one of them a Vatican official. The idea was to make sure that the voice of the local church in the trenches in the various parts of the world, representing all of the continents, is heard on a regular basis in the Vatican. So this council has adopted the custom of meeting 4 times a year. They meet for 3 incredibly busy days from 8 o'clock in the morning until about 7 or 8 at night, with breaks, very short breaks, along the way. The Holy Father has committed that he is in that room every minute of every day when that council comes together. And in the world of the Vatican, this has become a total revolution. Because in the old days, the ultimate authority in the church, obviously, formally, is the Pope, but those who really made the decisions and ground the sausage were the movers and shakers in the Vatican, the senior bureaucrats in the system. Now that is no longer the case. It has become abundantly clear through the creation of this institution that the ultimate decision-making authority in the church are the bishops in the trenches at the grassroots in concert with the Pope, and the bureaucratic system in the Vatican serves them. In other words, Francis has made it structural that when he has important decisions to make, the sounding board that he's bouncing these decisions off of is not composed exclusively of longtime Roman bureaucrats, but it's composed of men who were out in the trenches running churches, who have the on-the-ground perspective about how these things play. However, it's not just the big dogs in the system the Pope has made a point of reaching out to either. He also has found remarkably creative ways to make sure that he remains engaged with ordinary people. And probably the most famous of which is the way he has become. He has a lot of, the Bishop of Rome, as you know, has many titles. One of the new titles Pope Francis has acquired is as the cold call Pope, because he has become legendary for picking up the phone and just calling people at random. Typically, the way this works is that someone has written the Holy Father a letter, like a grandma in Puglia. Her grandson is in the hospital with some kind of, disease, and she's writing to ask the Pope to pray, and she'll put her phone number at the bottom of the letter. More often than not, what the Pope will do at night when he's sitting at his desk reading through his mail is he will simply pick up the phone and call that person. No intermediaries, no filters, no prior arrangement. He'll simply pick up the phone and call. He's become so legendary for this that one of the most famous comics in Italy, a guy who's kind of their version of Jon Stewart, the guy who does the fake news at night, he wrote a column for Corriere della Sera, which is like the New York Times of Italy, that became the best read thing on their site all last year. It was 10 etiquette tips, what to do when the Pope calls. Okay? My favorite was the one at the end. He said, listen, if the Pope gets a little long-winded, if he's going on a little bit, don't be the one to end the call, okay? Hear him out. And if your family is yelling at you, because he normally calls at night around dinner time, if they're yelling at you to get back to the dinner table, put them off, and then go to the table when you're done and say, by the way, the successor of St. Peter and the vicar of Christ on earth says hello. So what are we eating? And of course, part of that practice that the Holy Father has adopted is simply pastoral, most of the people who write him are people who are hurting for various reasons. But part of it, again, remember, grace perfects nature, doesn't cancel it. Part of it is also a program of governance. He wants to make sure that he remains in contact with ordinary people, that he is not insulated from or divorced from the experience that ordinary people are having in various parts of the world and in various stations of life, because he believes hearing that firsthand, unfiltered and unmediated, is an important aspect of governance. By the way, these phone calls are also important to the Pope in another regard, in that they also offer him the opportunity to reach out to people who are perhaps feeling alienated or embittered by some of the decisions that he is compelled to make. For example, one of the people he called about a year and a half ago was a very famous, a very famous traditionalist, therefore quite conservative, Catholic writer and intellectual in Italy by the name of Mauro Palmo. 6 months after this pope was elected, Palmo and a colleague of his did a piece for one of the leading Italian newspapers, the headline of which was "Perché questo Papa non ci piace?" Why we don't like this pope. Okay, hard to get more clear than that, right? And cataloged a whole truckload of things that they thought Francis was doing wrong. A little bit after that, Palmo had to be hospitalized and facing a very serious illness. And one night in his hospital room, the phone rings, and he picks it up, and the guy says, this is Papa Francesco, this is Pope Francis. And he went through the thing we would all do under those circumstances, which is, yeah, sure, who is this really? No, it's really Pope Francis. Oh my God. But as soon as he was beyond that, the Pope said, listen, I know you were in the hospital, and I wanted to call and let you know that I'm praying for you, and I'm going to dedicate my Mass tomorrow to you. And Palmo said back, well, Holy Father, that is so meaningful, particularly, in light of what I wrote about you, because it was a very famous piece. I mean, it's not like the Pope didn't know about it, particularly because of what I wrote about you. And the Pope wouldn't even let him finish. He cut him off, and he said, no. I know that you wrote that out of love, and those were things I needed to hear. Okay? So it's also an instrument of governance for the Pope in that way. Final insight about leadership I think we can discern from the Pope. Don't be afraid to ignore what you're hearing if something critically important is at stake, because there have been instances so far, a fairly lengthy list of them actually, in which Pope Francis clearly has acted contrary to the majority of opinion he was hearing from his closest advisors. I could give you many examples, but let me just give you one. I said earlier that one of the cornerstones of the Pope's reform project is a financial cleanup operation, long overdue financial cleanup operation inside the Vatican itself. One of the early moves he made along that path was he had to appoint a new prelate, that's a cleric who serves as not only as a spiritual advisor, but also a management consultant for the Vatican Bank. This institute, the Institute for the Works of Religion is its formal name, but basically is the bank inside the Vatican that controls $9 billion in assets and over the years has been a magnet for scandal and controversy. To fill this role, he appointed an Italian cleric by the name of Monsignor Gian Battista Ricca, a man he had come to know over the years and someone he had come to trust. Shortly after Monsignor Ricca was appointed to this position, there was a steamy expose in one of the Italian news magazines chronicling some fairly scandalous charges that had emerged against Monsignor Ricca earlier in his career in the mid-90s when he was a Vatican diplomat in Uruguay. Now, there was nothing criminal about the charges. There was no accusation of sexual abuse, but it nevertheless was a kind of sex scandal that had erupted around this figure the Pope had just appointed to help him implement reform at the Vatican Bank. I can tell you for sure, because I was in contact with senior Vatican officials every day during this crisis, that the overwhelming majority of advice the Pope was getting was that he needed to let this guy go because it was going to be an embarrassment and a distraction. And regardless of what you thought about how merited these accusations were, for the good of the team, okay, this guy needed to be moved on. That's what he was hearing at every level and from virtually everyone who had his ear during this moment of crisis. In the end, Francis did not do that. In the end, instead, he chose not only to keep Monsignor Ricca in his position, but during his first airborne news conference, when we were flying back from his trip to Brazil in the summer of 2013 for World Youth Day, he took a question about the Ricca controversy. The accusation, you should know, is that Monsignor Ricca had been involved in some homosexual affairs when he was in Uruguay. Not only, when Francis took the question, not only did he offer a ringing defense of Monsignor Ricca, but he delivered the soundbite that in some ways has gone on to become the emblematic expression of the spirit of this papacy, when he said that when I come into contact with gay people, my attitude is, who am I to judge? Okay, it was born of this controversy. Now, again, remember the savvy political dimension of Francis. What was going on here? This wasn't just a gesture of tolerance and compassion for an individual person. There was also a savvy management instinct at work here, which is if I create the precedent that I will allow my enemies to get in the way of reform by engaging in character assassination against the people I appoint to lead it, then that will never end. Okay, he had to take a stand to let people know that that was not going to work. He made that statement, and it was one of those instances in which his willingness to hear people's advice but to act against it has served him well. All right? You take those three things to heart. Lead by example, make sure you're getting good advice, and be willing to have the guts to ignore it when you have a point to make. That, folks, is a prescription for effective leadership. I want to end with one final insight, one final quality of heart and mind that I think is also often in the mix of effective leaders, and give you a papal anecdote to illustrate it. And this is listen, I mean, the laundry list of qualities we'd like leaders to have is almost infinite, but here's one that I think deserves a kind of pride of place, and that is a lively sense of humor. Okay, because if you don't have a good sense of humor and you were in a position of immense responsibility, you're going to spend all of your time wringing your hands and trying to fight down heartburn. All right? Now look, the good news about the Catholic Church is that you can find such a sense of humor in the most wildly improbable places. And I want to give you a story from the Pope Benedict years to illustrate it. You know, poor Pope Benedict, I mean, he had the historical misfortune of being sandwiched between two rock star popes, right? John Paul II and Francis. And he sometimes suffered in comparison, but I'm telling you, you will never meet a nicer guy. You will never meet a holier man. You sure as hell will never meet a smarter man. And the untold story of Pope Benedict is you will also never meet a funnier man. Okay? Here's the story. April 2005, when Pope Benedict was elected, of course, you all remember the enormous global interest in the death of John Paul II and the transition to Pope Benedict, right? To this day, the funeral mass of John Paul II is the most watched event in the history of global television. An estimated global television audience of 1.8, 1.9 billion people, depending on how you measure. And given that the total global population is 7 billion, that's fairly staggering. City of Rome estimates that some 5 to 10 million people, extra people, came through the city of Rome in those days to pay their respects to the late Pope. We interviewed one of these guys on CNN. He was Polish, naturally, Polish bus driver from Chicago who had some vacation days coming. And so when he heard that the Pope had died, he packed a bag and went to O'Hare, caught the first flight he could over to Fiumicino, figuring he would pay his respects to the Pope and then take a few days to bounce around Italy before he had to go home. Not realizing, of course, that 10 million other people had the same idea. So when he hailed a cab at Fiumicino, he said, "Take me to St. Peter's Square." And they said, "Man, you're not getting anywhere close to St. Peter's Square." He said, "Well, take me as close as you can get." So they dropped him off at the Castle Sant'Angelo, which is about a half mile away from the square. He stood in line with his suitcase in hand for the next 3 days, okay? And people, of course, there were Poles everywhere, all right? So, you know, he slipped into the community there. They were sharing food, giving him a sleeping blanket, sharing stories and all of that. Finally, at the end of this, he gets to the front of the line for those fleeting 15 seconds where he had the opportunity to pray in front of the casket of John Paul II. By that stage, he has burned through all of his vacation days. So other than coming up to our platform to do a quick interview, he gets in a cab, goes back to Fiumicino, and goes home. And he told us on air that it was the most moving experience of his life. Now you multiply that by 1 million, by 5 million, by 10 million. That was the story of those days. Okay? Now, anytime there is that kind of eruption of global interest in something, We media-savvy Americans know that as surely as night follows day, there will be a cottage industry of Instabooks looking to cash in on all that interest. And the way I know this, ladies and gentlemen, is that I participated in that cottage industry. I produced my own Instabook called The Rise of Benedict XVI, about the new Pope. Okay? Now, there's a tradition in the Vatican Press Corps that when one of us writes a book about the Holy Father, we always inscribe a copy to him. And then we give it either to his spokesperson or his private secretary or somebody close to the Pope to pass it on to him. Okay? Now, to be honest with you, it had never entered my mind for a moment that the Pope would actually read these books, because there's just too damn many. Okay? I mean, in my mind's eye, I had envisioned a box in the basement of the Apostolic Palace where these books just get tossed in and gather dust, right? So this book, the Benedict was elected in April. I wrote the book in May. The book came out June 1st. I dutifully inscribed a copy to the guy who was still the Holy Father's spokesperson at the time, Spanish layman, Opus Dei member by the name of Joaquin Navarro-Valls. And then I completely forgot about it, okay? Now, flash forward to August. My wife and I are back in the United States on vacation. We're visiting, well, at the time, she would have been, what, 93? My 93-year-old grandma out in rural western Kansas, okay? By the way, she lived in a place called Hill City, which is my candidate for the worst place name in America, because there is no hill, and there sure as hell is no city, okay? Talking about 700 people on a good day, right? I mean, the only time anybody ever goes to Hill City, if you don't have family there, is during the fall, because that's pheasant hunting season. Okay, y'all know what a pheasant is? It's a game bird, kind of like a turkey. I mean, folks, I have traveled the world in this job. With John Paul, I was in 65 countries. With Benedict, I was in 21. I've been on all of Francis's foreign trips. I've been around. I have stayed in some pretty funky lodgings, but the Western Hills Motel in Hill City, America, the only hotel there, is the only place on earth I have ever stayed where there is a laminated sign in the bathroom that reads, "Please do not gut your birds in the sink." First time I took my wife there, she asked me, "Is this some kind of weird sexual thing?" I had to explain, no, this is face value stuff. All right. So anyway, there we are in Hill City, America. And we're with my grandma at breakfast, because it was afternoon time in Europe, therefore it's morning in Kansas. And the phone goes off, you know how you can tell who's calling, right? So, I mean, I knew it was Joaquin Navarro-Valls, the Pope's spokesperson. So I answered, and he says, "Listen, John, I wanted you to know that I'm with the Holy Father on vacation." At that stage, this was when Pope still took vacations, by the way. Francis does not have an off switch, so he's canceled the tradition of papal vacations. But Benedict had the custom of taking his vacation up in northern Italy, and on this occasion, near the border with Switzerland, where the Alps are. On this occasion, he was at some chalet someplace. By the way, here's something interesting I noticed during the Benedict years. Every year he would vacation up in that part of the world. And every year, no matter where he went, the Salesians seemed to own a chalet that they could make available to him. So my recommendation to those of you who have Salesian friends, try to get in on their timeshare deals. And a really phenomenal piece of advice. Anyway, Navarro-Valls says, "I am with the Holy Father up in Val d'Aosta. And I wanted you to know he came down to breakfast this morning with your book in his hands. And he asked me to deliver to you a personal message." I don't know about you, but if you've just been told that the Holy Father has a personal reaction to something you've written about him, I would want to make sure that your tray table is in a full upright and locked position. The sky might get a little bumpy, but as I said to Navarro-Valls, by all means, of course, please tell me the message. Now, to get this, you need to understand that the book was divided into thirds, okay? So the first third was about the last days of John Paul II. The middle part was kind of the inside story of how Cardinal Ratzinger, Joseph Ratzinger, had been elected as Pope Benedict. And then the last third were my projections on where his papacy is going to go. Okay? So Navarro-Laval says, the Holy Father's message is the following. Please thank Herr Dr. Allen for having written this book, particularly the last part about the future of my papacy, because it has saved me the trouble of thinking about it for myself. I like to think he was kidding. Okay? Look, folks, my fundamental message to you here is this. Everyone in this room is a leader. Okay? Whether you're a leader in Catholic education or in religious life or in healthcare or in the chancery or whatever venue you're in, all of you, in some way, shape, or form, are called to lead. If you can take these two words, these 4 points to heart, that is, one, if you can make sure that you lead by example, never ask the people who work under you to do anything, to make any commitment, to have any quality of heart and mind, to undertake any task that you are not willing to do and commit to yourself. If you can make sure that you're getting advice, and the right kind of advice, not just from the usual suspects, but from the end users and the consumers and the stakeholders and all of those folks out there who were impacted by your activity. If you can have the guts to take that advice to heart, but to stand it down when there's a principle at stake or a point you need to make or a line in the sand you need to draw. And if you can do all of that with a twinkle in your eye, rather than bile in your spleen and rage in your hearts, then, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, you have a prescription for effective leadership every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Thank you. God bless the Orange Catholic Foundation. God bless the Diocese of Orange. God bless Bishop Bond. God bless the Sisters of St. Joseph. God bless our award winners. And ladies and gentlemen, Viva il Papa!